This is Jay Rogers. I'm the director of the Forerunner, and what I want to do in this video is to update what's going on in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. I haven't done a video in several months, but I want to kind of update what's been going on. I've been working on my book projects, and I'll tell you a little bit about that at the end of the video. You see here, this is a map of Ukraine, and this is called Military Summary Channel. There's a guy named Dima who lives in Belarus, and this is a really good way to keep updated on what's going on. You don't want to trust the media because they don't really tell you what the story. And one thing I find interesting about his map is he actually has all of the fortifications. These black lines are fortifications. And what I did was I grabbed an image off of his channel. And what this is if you look at these black lines, for instance, you look at there's primary fortifications, secondary fortifications, and tertiary fortifications. And in the very beginning of the war, there were several cities that were very difficult to take. And the reason why they were difficult to take was that the war didn't start in 2022, it started in 2014. And this is when the Euromaidan revolution took place. It was a very pro-nationalist government that came in, and they overthrew the constitutionally elected president, and they put in an interim president. Then they elected Poroshenko, who is a very kind of a radical anti-Russian guy. And the president before that was more, not so much pro-Russian, but he realized that they were never going to get to join the European Union, and that he thought that it would be better to strengthen the ties with Russia economically. And so that was very unpopular with the Western Ukrainians. The Eastern Ukrainians supported, and the Western Ukrainians did not. So the Eastern Ukrainians felt that their president had been put out of office illegally, and he was put out of office illegally. And the United States supported that, and most of the Western countries supported that as well, with a couple of exceptions. And so what happened from there was a civil war that went on for several months, very intense fighting, and they did a ceasefire called Minsk I. Then that didn't work. They did another ceasefire called Minsk II. And the original terms of Minsk I and Minsk II is that the Russian-speaking areas, which would have been northern and southern Donbass, which is Lugansk, and Donetsk. The Donbass means the Donetsk River Basin. So the Donetsk Basin, Donbass. Mariupol is a southernmost city, and then there's actually a Donetsk city. So the deal was they wanted to have autonomy. And autonomy just means something like that we would have in our states. Like, for instance, in the United States, we have like a bicameral government. We have the House of Representatives, the Senate, the judiciary, and then the executive branch. But we also have a lower government, and we elect our own state officials. So the Ukrainians do not elect their governors. What they do is they elect the president, and then the Duma, excuse me, not the Duma, but it's called the Rada in Ukraine. Duma is Russian. And then the Ukrainian parliament, or the Rada, they appoint the governors. So they were getting these very anti-Russian governors in Russian-speaking areas, and they wanted to shut down Russian-speaking schools, have only Ukrainian spoken in school. You got to do business in Ukrainian and so on. So for many of the Russians in that era, they knew some Ukrainian, but they wanted to preserve their culture. If you look at this area in detail, there's Crimea. Crimea was basically Russian since the 1700s. And it was part of the Russian Empire, and then later part of the Soviet Union, and it was part of Russia. It was given to Ukraine in the 1950s. And when the Soviet Union first broke up, Crimea was the only one of the oblasts to just barely, they did a referendum, should Ukraine leave the Soviet Union? They first voted in 1990, 1991, around that time, and they voted no, we want to stay in the Soviet Union. And then after the Soviet Union broke up, they held a referendum saying, do we want to leave or not? And so they voted to leave. It was kind of obvious. And so they established their own country, their own nation, their own republic. And the only exception was the vote in Crimea was like 52%. It was very close. There's this other region called Transnistria, and they never left the Soviet Union. That's another story. We can talk about that later. But Transnistria basically is a separatist area. They don't consider themselves part of Ukraine or part of Russia, although they're supported by Russia. It's a strange kind of a area. Basically, what it was Moldova was originally part of Romania. It was carved out by the Soviet Union, but there are a lot of Russian and Ukrainian speaking people in this area, kind of like Ukrainian in the north, Russian in the south. And they felt that if Moldova ever rejoined Romania, that they would be persecuted because they, you know, there's historically have been problems between Ukrainians and Romanians and Russians and Romanians and so on. So that was that situation. And then in Eastern Donbass was also added to Ukraine during the time of the Soviet Union. So, you know, these are people, some of them were born in Russia, then they were added to Ukraine, but it would be like going from, okay, your town was part of Massachusetts, now it's part of Rhode Island. It would be that type of thing. But which has actually happened in our states. Sometimes they've changed the lines of states over history. So that happens, but they're all part of the Soviet Union. They're all Soviet people, and they always consider themselves Russian. So several times during the history of Ukraine, there were votes to actually leave Ukraine and become autonomous, like actually establish their own republic. There was another vote to just become an autonomous region, and Ukraine kind of worked with them. But when the Euromaidan government came in, that was all going to be negated, and they weren't going to be able to self-rule anymore. And so the Crimea broke off. Russia ceded them, or they ceded to Russia. And it's not as though like Russia invaded them and now they're under Russia's heel. It's more like the people literally wanted to join Russia because they were Russian. And Russia wanted it because there's a naval base there called Sevastopol. And they have their fleet there. And it's very important for them in the Black Sea. So they had a long-term lease, but they felt that now that long-term lease would be violated by this government. So they were hedging their bets and saying we should take this now rather than run into a conflict later. In Donbass, what happened was they broke off and they voted to become independent, not to join Russia, but to become independent. Then there was a later vote to say that, you know, we want to be an autonomous region of Ukraine. And there were negotiations. There was skirmishes broke out. There was some pretty intense fighting. Russia helped Donbass, and then the Western countries like Germany, France, whatever, they sent advisors to help the Ukrainians. And then what happened in 2015 was that there was Minsk I and Minsk II. Minsk II basically said that yes, these regions can be autonomous. They need to remain in Ukraine, but we're going to give them more freedom to conduct their own affairs. And that was they never held elections. They never set up elections, and that was never done. What happened was the fighting continued sporadically. And the Ukrainians say, well, the Russians need to withdraw their troops first. All the troops that are in there, they need to withdraw, you know, well back from the line of contact. Then we'll set up elections for you. And then the pro-Russian side said, no, we want to have elections first, and then we'll tell the troops to stand down once we have some real autonomy. So it's like the Minsk agreements were not written well enough to really define certain things. Like, you know, was Russia a participant? Were they an observer? All those things were unanswered. But Andrea Merkel, Emmanuel Macron, and then Poroshenko, who is the president of Ukraine at that time, have said that the only reasons for the Minsk agreements was to basically buy time. Like they basically said that, you know, we're eventually going to go back in, we're going to take this territory back, but we just did these agreements to build up troops. So that's what they've been doing for the 8 years between 2014 and 2022. If you look at this area, I'm going to try to go to a different map here. This is called Deep State Map. And there we go. Oops. Got that. This is the whole country of Ukraine right here. And then this is a zoom in. Deep State Map is a pro-Ukrainian map. They don't actually show Ukrainian positions. You can see that more in Dima's map. But if you notice, this is where all the Russian troops are. And long story short, I'm not going to do a blow by blow, but last few months, the Russians have they have a foothold up here in Kharkiv region because Ukrainians were shelling the city of Belgorod, and they wanted to make sure that that wasn't going to continue to happen. They're not trying to take Kharkiv, but they're not at this time anyway. But they're trying to get a buffer zone in there so the Ukrainians can't hit Belgorod. The other thing they did was they took Donetsk City. That was part of the pre 2015 lines, but they took another city north of that, where the Ukrainians had a staging area where they were staging a lot of things there. So what the Russians want to do between now and 2015 is they want to get out all the way to this line right here, and this is basically the line of the oblast. This is legally, according to the Russian constitution, part of Russia, and they already have most of so if you look at this map, I have to zoom in a little bit here. What you're going to notice is it looks like a rural area with a lot of farms, but the eastern part of this is more suburban. Like, it's every kilometer, every half kilometer, every 2 kilometers, there's a little village or a town. And many of these are mining towns. You can see, like, these are all strip mines up here and so on. And the real strongholds, right, have been, let's see. Well, first of all, the strongholds, the most heavily fortified areas were in cities where cities that were built during Soviet times that were hubs, kind of like for the, they have like the metal industry, the coal industry, the gas industry, the oil industry is all located in this area. This is probably like the most resource rich part of Ukraine, and the rest of Ukraine has resources too, farms and so on. But they were having trouble with this area right here, which is called let me see where, I don't know why I'm drawing a blank here, but anyway, this area up here was Avdiivka. I'm sorry, Avdiivka, and then there's also this other one called Krasnogorivka. So those were very, very heavily fortified, and it took Russians months to take that. And now, since they've taken that, they've been expanding very quickly, because what happens here is you've got the primary lines are very heavily fortified, and then the secondary fortifications are less fortified, and then there are these tertiary fortifications, and these are even less fortified. So you can see that on this map, how if they want to get to this line, they have to first break through all of these fortifications. And what the Russians are doing is not trying to so much take land, but what they're doing is they're trying to demilitarize the Ukrainian military. They're trying to do as much destruction as possible to their equipment, their guns, their tanks, whatever the West has supplied them. The United States made a big mistake when we went into Afghanistan and Iraq, because what we did was we took the capital city, we bombed the infrastructure of the entire country, rolled the troops in, took the territory, but the troops just scattered and they went into hiding, and then later they came back, and now Afghanistan is in the hands of the Taliban, and Iraq is in the hands of a very anti-American government. So the Russians know that's not going to work. They're not going to be able to rule Ukraine. Like, they're not going to be able to take over Kiev and go to Western Ukraine, where people are very anti-Russian. What they want to do is probably get, Kharkiv, or at least the buffer zone north of Kharkiv. They want all of the 2 Donbass regions, and then also Kherson, and there's this line right here. If you look north, you can see that there's north of this Melitopol, which is a city here. You see that this is the Zaporizhia, and then we have Kherson. So there's these other lines. And if they get to that point, they're going to say, okay, ceasefire and negotiations, and we have our oblasts, and we want Ukraine to withdraw from any NATO consideration, and that will be the peace treaty that they'll accept. If they don't get that, then they're going to go further. And there's some other regions like Odessa, which is heavily Russian. I have a new friend from Odessa I just met recently. He understands what's going on. You don't get it from our media. So that's basically my video. I wanted to update you on that. What I'm expecting to happen, and I'm not a prophet. I don't know, I don't know. I can't predict the future with certainty. But what I'm expecting to happen is that once the Russians get past these lines, and they've been making very good progress with the breaking down Ukrainian troops, is that they get through the secondary lines, the land acquisition part of it will move a lot faster. Like they will be able to go all the way to the line that they want to, and possibly even to the Dnieper River, which is, that would be like two more oblasts, which is parts of Kherson, and then parts of this other region, which is actually called Dnipropetrovsk, or as the Ukrainians call it, Dnipropetrovsk. I think the Ukrainians call it Dnipro, and the Russians call it Dnipropetrovsk. That's how it goes. So anyway, so basically that whole region, those 8 oblasts, were part of something in the 1800s called New Russia, and Ukraine was a region in the Russian Empire. Western Ukraine was part of Poland, Hungary, like this line right here from, if you look at Lviv, Ternopil, there's another city called Ivano-Frankivsk, and that whole region was Polish. And then there was also a Hungarian region, which is everything west of the Carpathian Mountains. And then there was also a region that was Romanian, which went all the way out to that area. And then there was Bessarabia, which was also Romania as well. So this area, Moldova, was part of Romania. And Romania actually, I don't know when Bessarabia became part of Russia. It was either during the Russian Empire or afterward, but Romania was not a country prior to World War I or World War II. It was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So after World War II, but it was part of that empire. And then the southern part of Ukraine up until the 1700s was always part of the Ottoman Empire. So basically, we're in a time of shift, and a lot of nations in the East and global South are moving away from the Western model of what we call the nation state. And we've been hearing from people like guys like J.D. Vance and other people who have said that a nation is not nations are not based on politics and ideology. Nations are people, and most countries in the world have always thought that way. The West would like countries to be founded on ideology, like liberalism, liberal democracy, and then that ideology governs the nation. And throughout history, there have always been countries that have been, there was no such thing as a country 500 years ago, the way that we think of a country. What there were tribal people, there were kingdoms, and then there were empires. Empires were like giant multinational states, and there were not even definite boundaries on what the empire was. It was just like, how much does our army control? But usually the great empires were united around a dominant culture, like the Greek culture, or the Persian culture, the Babylonian culture, the Aztec culture, the Inca culture, and all of the tribes around them were, there were no geographical lines where it's like, okay, so we own these tribes over here, but the tribes gravitated toward the large civilizational state. So that's kind of like what the vision that Russia has. It's also the vision China, India, Africa, South America has. The only people that don't understand that are people in the West. So this is part of the reason for the conflict. The victory of Russia in Ukraine will be the beginning of the multipolar world, which will be based on civilization states, which are not political states, but states that are based on culture, religion, language, and things like that. So I'm working on a book right now that's about that. It's called The Fourth Political Theory and Biblical Perspective. And it's about Ray Dalio's work in economics, where he describes this phenomenon from an economic standpoint about how there's been different Western empires that control the reserve currency, like what the different countries use to trade. And then that shifted from country to country over the last 500 years. First it was Portugal, then Spain, then the Dutch, Netherlands, and France, then Great Britain, and now the United States. And now that's shifting toward, some people say China, but what I say in the book is, I say it's going to be multipolar. There won't be one single country that dominates the whole world. There never has been. There never will be, I don't think. But it'll be multipolar economies, multipolar economic systems, multipolar civilizations. And so that's what we're headed toward. The victory of Russia and Ukraine will be the beginning of that world. So I'm actually excited about it. I think that that's going to be great for the gospel. I'm a Christian writer, Christian media producer, and we want to reach the nations. And, if the best way to reach the nations with the gospel is for there to be peace in the nations and not continual wars. And so the idea of the civilization state is there can actually be a dialogue among civilizations where people don't infringe on the culture and the territories of these large civilizations, but there will be smaller conflicts along the buffer zones, like these little cleft regions. And the cleft regions will probably have wars forever. It's like never be like complete world peace, but people will know not to attack China because China has nuclear weapons. It's very big. But also we'll cease from the economic warfare as well and allow China to have its system, allow Russia to have its system, and to be competing with them, and even to be friendly with them, in certain cases, but friendly competition, not economic warfare. So that's my video for today. I haven't done one in a while. I'm going to start getting back into the Daniel series. And then after that, my book on the multipolar world, which is called The Fourth Political Theory and Biblical Perspective. That'll be out, and I'll also do a series on that. So hope to do more videos. Please like and subscribe. It's going to help. I'm going to try to do these more frequently now, maybe 1 or 2 a week. And we're going to also try to build up the channel. So God bless.